All right. Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Lacey Villava. I'm also joined today by our staff archaeologist, Dave Shanyo, and Susan Hardenberg, one of our archaeology volunteers. We're going to start by looking at the dig site. We're going to spend some time talking about how artifacts get mended, and then we're going to wrap up with a look at the burial ground here at Gunston Hall. Sadly, we are not able to do live experiences at either the dig site or the burial ground. If you ever get a chance to come out and visit here at Gunston Hall, our cell reception and our Wi-Fi signal at both of those spaces is really challenging. So I've got two videos for those, but we'll have a question and answer session with Dave, our staff archaeologist, after both of those. So without further ado, let's get started.
Good morning. My name is Dave. I'm the staff archaeologist here at Gunston Hall. It's a real pleasure to do archaeology here because Gunston Hall is interested in making this place look more like it did in George Mason's time. And the only way they can find out the way it looked in George Mason's time is basically through archaeology. So in most archaeology programs, people do archaeology and write a paper, a few people read, and they put the artifacts in a box and it goes in storage. But here, we can actually see the things we find being reproduced here on the site. For example, off to my left here, they are remaking a garden. And we spent many years over there, so we have the pleasure now of seeing all of these things sort of come to life for us. The place we're working here is a site that we think was a place where George Mason had a stable. Normally we don't know where things are very well on the grounds here because there are no documents or paintings or drawings or anything like that that will show us what this outdoor landscape looked like. But we have some hints. One of George Mason's sons, by the name of John, wrote what he called a recollection for his children and grandchildren, talking about what it was like here when he was a child at Gunston Hall. And in doing so, he mentions some things just in passing. And at one point, he talks about what was on this side of the mansion. He says it was a schoolhouse, and there was a line of walnut trees, and just beyond that, there was a stable. Hurrah! We know where the stable was, and it's right behind me here, we think. Gunston Hall wants to put a building up in this area that looks as much as possible as that stable looked like in George Mason's time. And what we're doing out here is trying to figure out something about that stable. Now, in the 1950s, when this place opened up to the public, there was a barn standing here. And there's been a lot of thought that that barn was actually the stable in George Mason's time, and it just came down through the years. The barn was finally torn down, but we can see over here these stones lying here are where that barn was. And for years, we thought that those stones were just put down there by somebody to show us where the barn was. Okay, that during this archaeology program, we found out different, and I'd like to show you some of the things that we have turned up here when we're doing archaeology. Now, I'd like to emphasize that we're not finished with this. What you see here is where we left off in December, and we haven't been able to get back here to do any work because of the lockdown. So this what you're seeing here is just where we walked away from it one day last December. Now we're coming back and taking another look at it. Okay? One of the neat things about archaeology is that you often find unexpected things. You have in your mind what you should find, and what you do find can be completely different. Now, I think you've seen the picture of the old barn that was here in the 1940s, and you can see that there are open spaces on one end of the barn. And we thought we'd dig right along where those open spaces were and see if we could find where the posts that was holding up that part of the barn were. But instead, this is what we found here. A whole line of stones all lined up. And they're not only stones lined up, but there's mortar. There's mortar holding those stones together. Now, what is this? We haven't figured it out yet. But this is something that ran along the whole length of that one side of the barn. we know it was big, it was taller than it is because on top of some of these stones we see some hardened mortar, and there's impressions of stones there where stones were there before and they got knocked off. So what it looks like, somebody just came along and knocked this thing over. Our best guess right now that this was some kind of wall here, but we don't know what the purpose of the wall was. And this is something we'll still be looking at this year when we start our archaeology program again. Okay, now this is a segment of this wall, and you can see along this side the stones are lined up nice and straight, but they're sort of jumbled over here. So we think that this wall was up against some soil. It was probably, may have been holding some soil back to keep it from eroding downhill. We don't know. The other thing you can see is some of the mortar that was here. And the reason we know that this isn't just sort of a random bunch of rocks is that we have this mortar holding together. So it was something, we know it was something somebody built, but we just don't know the purpose of it. Now, I mentioned earlier that we thought these rocks along here were something somebody just laid down to show where the barn was. But we decided to dig down beside these rocks in a couple of places, and this is what we found. This, you don't pay any attention to this. These are just roots that were in there. But look here. It looks like there's 2 layers of rocks along here. Okay. One of the explanations for that is that there was actually an earlier building. And this is the foundation down here, the earlier building, and that was torn down, and another building was put up in the same place. And this was the foundation for the later building. Now we have a painting that was made in the early 1800s showing the back of the house, but it shows a building over here. It's a very fancy looking building, and we think that that may have been the original stable. And here we see evidence of it down here. Now, we don't know that for sure. That's just a hypothesis right now. But what I'd like to do is take samples of the mortar that's up here and some of the mortar that's down here and see if they're different ages. See if the mortar down below is older than the mortar up above it. And that would pretty much seal our thoughts about this being an old foundation with a newer foundation built on top of it. Now, the other thing we have here is what's called a builder's trench. We took the soil out of the builder's trench. And a builder's trench is a place where people dig down when they have to put something underground so they can get at it. They dug a trench along here so they could get down, put the stones in there, and mortar them together. Now, the interesting thing about builder's trenches is that it contains the trash that was in the ground at the time that that trench was built, was dug. And then the dirt was thrown back in there, so all of that trash went back in the trench.
What kind of trash have you found in that trench?
Well, that's what I'm getting to. We found almost nothing. Builders' trenches are considered very valuable for the trash they contain, but there was virtually nothing in here. And that tells us something too. That tells us that this was dug pretty early in the history of this plantation, before people were here scattering trash on the ground. So this indicates that this is pretty old. This goes back to the beginning of when people started living here at the Okay, now this is a excavation unit that we just started working on last December, and I just pulled the pollen off it for the first time this year just to take a look at it. You can see we just barely got started, and what we're doing is digging along this foundation again, trying to get a better look at it, and also anything that might have been next to it. Now you can see that this isn't very deep yet. We'll be going a lot deeper, but what we do is just take a small section of the soil off at a time, and we do that very level. Now I'm not sure you can see it, but if you look along here, you can see that this is just about the same depth all the way across here. We take that soil off and we look at the artifacts in there. And the reason we do that is artifacts get older and older and older as they go down in the soil. So you want to keep artifacts that are about the same age together. So we just take the soil off in thin layers like this. The other reason we do this is sometimes we see things in the soil, like stains in the soil, that tells us something was here, like a post hole or something like that.
Is that how you found that builder's trench?
Yes, yes indeed. And the only way you can see it is that you have a nice smooth surface. And if you dig too deep, you might just dig the whole thing out before you even see it. Okay, the way we get this at the same depth, we measure everything from this corner, from one corner. We pick one corner and we call that the datum corner.
And it's always the same corner on every unit, is that right?
We always use the southwest corner, unless there's some reason we can't, like there's something standing there. But now, how do we manage to measure the depth from here if we're over there, for example? And the way we do that is we use what is called a line level. There's a little thing, we put this thing on a string, and there's a bubble in the center, and we get along here, and we get that bubble right in the middle. So that means that this string, when that's in the middle of the string, is the same height as this marker here. And so we just take and measure down for the string there, and that gives us a level. And as our archaeologists are working here, they keep measuring as they go along to make sure that they stay at that same level as they go along. And mainly dig by going across like this, right? And we gather up the dirt in a dustpan like this, and this is what I'm looking for. And we get more than that. Then we fill up this bucket with dirt, and then we take the dirt over and screen it.
So I'm very excited to say that we have our staff archaeologist, Dave Shagno, here with us to answer any of the questions that you still have from having seen that video. So here we have Dave on the line. Does anyone have any thoughts or questions for him? I mean, I know I always do. I'm curious, Dave, can you tell us about any of the artifacts that you have found in that dig site? You mentioned you didn't really find any in the Builder's Trench, but I know you've been digging a lot around there. So what else have you found over there?
Well, since there was a building there, what we're finding is a lot of debris from the time that they tore the building down, and also when they first built it. So we're finding a lot of things like nails and window glass and that sort of thing. But we also find a few things like bits of pottery, ceramics. And these are especially important because ceramics are one of the things that we use to tell the date of something. And since this was used as a barn at one time, we're finding a lot of pieces of metal that have fallen off, for example, machinery, and it's really, sometimes it's really hard to tell what they are.
So how did you, other than knowing that George Mason's son, indicated that the stable was somewhere over that direction, and we had the stones that were kind of left there, what other things, what were you looking for? What were you hoping to find when you started digging there?
Okay. As I think we mentioned, there was a barn sitting there until sometime in the 1950s when it was torn down. And it has long been thought that that barn that came down through the 20th century was the original stable that George Mason had there. And we wanted to see if we could find anything in the ground that would either tell us that in fact was the stable, or there was a different building there when George Mason lived here. Okay, so so hopefully what we would find then is the size and shape of the building, and perhaps some idea of how it was constructed, what it was made out of. Was it made out of wood or stones, brick, or whatever?
So we have a question about the mystery wall. Did it go all the way around the building or just in that one section?
Just along that one side. It went along the entire side. And something that's kind of interesting is that when we went out there and measured the length of that and measured the foundation that was out there, that building that was sitting there was exactly the same size on the ground as the mansion, 60 feet by 40 feet.
That's fascinating.
And it
It was sort of sitting next to the mansion. You know, you saw that painting that was shown earlier, and
Right.
it was facing the same direction. It was just lined up with the mansion. So he built this stable for his horses, exactly the same size of the house.
That's really fascinating. Let's take one more look at that picture really quick. This is a really fascinating image from the 1870s. And we can see the house. So we're looking at the back of the house, what is now in the garden that Dave is really excited about, archaeology having purpose here at Gunston Hall. There is now a fence that would screen this building over here from sight. And this is that building that you're looking at, right, Dave?
That's correct. The building that's to the left of the mansion is the building that we're looking at, yes. And it looks quite different from that barn that was torn down in the 1950s. The roof, for example, is completely different from that old barn.
Mm-hmm. So we have another question in the chat. Have you been able to determine how old the artifacts are? The ones at the stable dig site?
No, we have not had a chance to analyze the artifacts that have come out of there yet. No, unfortunately.
So you just started digging at that particular site, the stable site, last year. Is that right?
Last year, yes, sort of at the end of the season. So we've still got some more work to do on that. And this lockdown kind of interrupted our lab work, so we haven't had a chance really to look at the artifacts and analyze them from that dig.
In the normal course of things, if life was perfect, how long typically do you think it would take you to get from the dig site, the stable site, to identifying an artifact, what it is, how old it is? How long does that take you typically?
Longer than we would like. One of my problems is I have to submit an annual report at the end of every year. And when I write that report, I haven't had a chance to really look at the artifacts yet. So
right.
How long it takes really depends on how many artifacts we get. You know, sometimes we hit a place that just hundreds of artifacts, and it takes us several years to go through that stuff. In some places, there's just not too much at all. So.
Got it. So we have another question in the chat about the side of the mansion that we're looking at. That's a great question, Cheryl. The side of the mansion we're looking at is the one with the river behind us. Sadly, for those of you who can also see the chat with the tree road side of the house, our big tree on the mansion, right by the mansion, unfortunately had some big limbs taken down in a windstorm, and we discovered it wasn't well. So when you get to come back out here to Gunston Hall, you will not see that big, massive oak tree out on the land front side of the house. But you will still see the fantastic avenue of cedars and magnolias lining the driveway. All right, any last thoughts or questions from anybody? All right, then I'm going to turn the floor over to Susan. Susan Hardenberg is one of our archaeology volunteers here at Gunston Hall. And she's going to be talking to us today about how she mends artifacts. So we've gotten her a kit at home, so she's joining us virtually, obviously, today. And Susan is going to tell us a little bit about herself and then talk a little bit about how she does what she does.
Hi everyone, I'm Susan Hardenberg. I'm a volunteer archaeologist at Gunston Hall. Been there about 19 years this October. It doesn't feel like it, but it certainly has. One of my biggest responsibilities with Gunston Hall and the archaeology department right now is restoring some of the artifacts to what their original shape is. And that's only if we're lucky enough to have enough pieces to do that, which sometimes we are, sometimes we're not. But the main focus of my work has been restoring the glass wine bottles that we found in the kitchen yard, not the kitchen yard, the site over where we found the road going down to Gunston Landing. That's been several years ago. So this is what Lacey mentioned, my kit. So this is kind of what I have to work with. You're not going to see my face, but you will see what I'm doing. Okay, can everybody see it? Okay.
Yep, you're good,
Okay.
Susan.
All right, so what will happen is when we're actually in, and I do all this work in the lab, Dave will give me a bag of artifacts, or maybe he'll just give me pieces that he needs me to restore. When that bag comes in, it's going to look like this. It's kind of a jumble. So what I first want to do is go through and pick out pieces that I think probably go together. I'm going to look at things like texture, pattern, color, obviously, things like that. So I kind of sort it all out first. And that gives me...
This is a little easier for you today than it is normally, Susan, isn't it?
Yes, normally because I actually have some color to go with.
Right.
Well, the glass wine bottles, they're all olive green, but there are variations in the shade. So if you really got some good light and get a lot of practice in, you can kind of differentiate a little bit. And there's different thicknesses and stuff like that. That helps, but it is a very long process. And then you find out sometimes you don't always have all the pieces to go with it. All right, so we're sorted pretty well for right now. Okay, so I think we're going to start with this beautiful piece because I just like it. All right, so what we have here kind of looks like it might be a pot. And I've got some nice big pieces here. So I'm just going to start kind of fitting these around, seeing where they belong, seeing if I can find where they belong.
And if you've got a broken piece of a dish, a plate, a bowl, a pot, at home, you can follow along and do this just as do most of these steps that Susan's doing today. And I can see you've got that one nicely fit there, Susan.
Yes, we got that worked out pretty well. So this piece is going to fit here. So what I do, and I don't know if this is an accepted archaeology practice, but what I do is I use some Scotch tape to hold it in place until I'm ready to glue it back together. And I do that for a couple reasons. A, it holds it in place, but two, if you can see, I'm missing a piece right here. So if I can find that piece, this way I just have to untape it. I don't have to actually, re-break the bottle and start over again, gluing it, which I have done many, many times, because it's always a work in progress.
By re-breaking, Susan, you mean
taking it apart. I shouldn't say re-break it, because I'm certainly not going to drop it on the floor, but taking it apart so I don't have to keep doing that over and over again, because eventually the bottle is not going to go back together. All right, so, but it looks like here, I think I might have found that piece. I hope. Nope. Nope. Nope, I keep trying to put that there, but it just doesn't fit. Okay, so we have here, I've got this beautiful piece, and that looks like it goes there. And this is another place where the tape comes in really handy. You can see I'm missing a big piece right here. That's a little bit better. I'm missing this piece. So until I find those pieces, the tape kind of holds the structure together and it's not falling apart. Okay? So that's how I do it. And I just keep looking and piecing it together. It's a puzzle. It's the puzzle, and I love doing it. It's a lot of fun. But when I get an entire vessel together, or I get enough together that I can actually start gluing it, that's when the real fun starts. But we're going to take a look at this other vessel, and if you see, it's got a design here, or kind of a different tone, and there's a very distinctive edge to it. that actually helps a lot, because then I can kind of start lining it up. No, I don't think these two go together just like that, but it helps me if like there's a line or a very specific design, I can use that to match the pattern, and that helps me put the pieces back together. Again, it's a puzzle. So
This is the ultimate puzzle. No
yeah,
box
this is the
to look
ultimate
at.
puzzle. These don't look like they go back together very well. I haven't got all the pieces, which is not an unusual occurrence. That happens a lot. So this one's going to require a little bit more effort, a little bit more attention. Well, actually, that looks like these two pieces go together right here. And again, it's a very fine piece, and that's where the tape comes in handy, because I can tape it like so. And that's going to hold the shape, and that gives me another piece to look for right here that's got a very distinctive shape to it. So now I want to look for that piece and see if I can find it and keep building it out as I go. Okay, so I will keep doing that until I've got a pretty good size section to glue. Just depends on the shape of the artifact, and I'd say probably from this handle here and the rest of this, I've got some kind of a mug or a cup. Again, we've determined this one's a pot.
So, Susan, is it part of your job to identify objects when you find them? Or basically, do you just start piecing them together until we've got a more whole artifact?
Well, usually when I'm working on different pieces, I kind of know what they are. Like the wine bottles are a good example. I already know those pieces of glass are coming from wine bottles, or I should say some type of bottle, because as I've worked with those fragments, and I have hundreds and hundreds of them, they're not all wine bottles. We've actually found some pieces from other types of bottles. We've found some pieces of very clear glass in like an octagon shape that we think might have been an inkwell. That's going to be
cool.
That's going to be much later than George Mason's time. It's going to be more probably 19th century, maybe even 20th century. We found that. We found some different shaped bottles that were probably not used for wine per se, but maybe some other type of liquid. And then we have one really big bottle that the base is about this big. It's really huge. And the shape is, when I get it put together, and I don't have all of that either, that would be too heavy to hold wine. When it was full, it'd be, you just couldn't pick it up. But that might have held something like oil, some other type of liquid in it. It's still olive glass, but it's just not, it's too big to do wine.
When you say olive glass, you mean it's green colored?
Right, it's a dark green, olive green color. And like I said, there's different variations in it. Some of it's darker, some of it's lighter.
Yeah, of course. So once you get enough pieces together, what's your next step?
Okay, so the next step, after I've put the pieces together as much as I can, and I'll show that with this pot, is I'm ready to glue. And I use this type of adhesive. It's called B72 restorative adhesive, and this is what museums use. And this is not meant to be a permanent adhesive. It helps me put things back together for a little while, but if we need to take the artifacts apart for any reason, this is the stuff you want to use. And we take them apart because it's to store them easier. Because, you know, it's a little easier to store a bottle in pieces than it is the entire bottle. All right,
I notice you're putting gloves on. This is so you don't get it on your hands, right?
Safety first. Always safety. Main reason this stuff is extremely sticky, and I do not want to glue my fingers together.
It's basically like getting super glue on your fingers by accident.
Pretty much. And unless you've got some handy nail polish remover to unstick your hands, you might have some trouble. Okay, so what I've got here, yeah, that's good. And this stuff is like super runny too, so I want to be really careful with it. It doesn't really matter which piece I use to glue, but what I'm seeing, it's already starting to run. What I do is put like a really thin kind of coating here. And then I'm going to let it sit for a few minutes because I want that glue. I don't want to use it right away. I need it to dry just a little bit, get a little bit tacky. That gives the artifact a surface to adhere to, if that makes sense.
So what I'm hearing you say, and tell me if this is right or not, is that you need for it to, the surface to not, that you're adhering it to not be perfectly smooth.
Right.
And you need for the glue to acquire a little bit of tack. Like if you've ever left a puddle of Elmer's glue sitting on a surface, it gets tackier the longer it sits until it dries.
Right. Right. And it just, when it gets a little bit tacky, it just adheres better when I actually clump it together.
Gotcha.
Which is what I want. So now we're just going to wait for a few minutes.
So what's your, while we're waiting, Susan, what's your favorite artifact you've ever put together?
Oh, they're all my favorites. The big bottle that I have is one of my favorites because it's unexpected. We didn't think we were going to get that. The ink bottle that I was able, at least the base I was able to put together last year, which had the maker's mark on it. That's been a favorite too. We've got some different types of wine bottles that we didn't know we had. We kind of assumed they would all be the exact same shape and size. That's not the case. We found some that are called onion bottles, and they have kind of a squat base to them, and then they taper as they go up. We didn't know we had those, and we have 4 of them right now in various stages of being reconstructed, and those actually predate the house. We suspect they came from Ann Albach's father, but we don't know for sure. So we had no idea we would find anything like that at Gunston Hall until we started putting these back together, until I started putting them back together. So the more I do this work, the more clues we have, the more questions we have, the more evidence we have that life at Gunston is pretty neat.
Yeah, it's always exciting to see what y'all have found, obviously, because I don't get to spend all of my time out at the dig site. And to see what you're working on. Every time I get to go into the lab and see what you've got sitting out, Susan, it's always exciting to see how much more of a bottle is put together since the last time I was there. Yes.
And I've had to get more stronger glasses over the years as I've been working on this project. It'll definitely go with right? Yeah. Okay, so the tag is pretty tacky. It's about what I want it to do. The consistency is what I want. So I'm going to put a second coat of glue on, and then I'm going to match it up as tight and as best as I can.
What does the second coat of glue do?
That's going to give you now you've got the surface that it's going to stick. This is going to make it stick.
Gotcha.
Actually hold together.
Got it.
Then I'm going to, oh, that didn't work. All right, so now I'm going to put it together. I'm going to hold it in place as tight as I can and put some more tape on it to hold it in place while it sticks. And I'm also going to use a Q-tip, get them open, and kind of get some of the excess glue off so that the seam will be as smooth as I can make it. And once it dries, if I still have more glue that I need to take off, that's what the X-Acto knife's for. And it'll get most of it off without actually damaging the artifact, which is what I got.
It. So you very, very carefully are shaving away.
Very careful, because these artifacts, especially the glass I'm using, it's actually quite fragile. And I need to be very careful I don't keep re-breaking it, which I have done. Okay, so once I've got some pieces glued on here and I'm ready to just let it sit and dry, that's what the sand is for. The sand container is for. Now this one, because it's got a nice base, I don't need to put it in the sand. But let's say I was gluing this piece onto here before I attached it, I would put those two pieces in the sand just like this and let the sand hold it until it's ready to be attached to a bigger piece. So if I've got like some smaller pieces I'm gluing together, that's what the sand's for. The sand is not abrasive, so it's not going to scratch the glass, and it's very fine sand. If you can see it a little bit better, it's very, very fine sand, and there's a lot of it because it's strong enough to hold the pieces up. Like this is a good example. If I was gluing this and I want to hold together, I would just put it in the glass and sand like that.
Up a little higher, Susan.
There you go.
There you go.
Set it in the sand like that, and it'll hold it steady until the glue dries and it's strong enough that I can pick up the piece without it falling apart again.
How long does it take for the glue to dry?
Probably about 24 hours, because I usually come on Saturdays. Then it's a solid week before everything between trips when I'm over there, but I'd say probably within about 24 hours, maybe a little bit longer. That's for it to get good and dry so I don't have to worry about it falling apart. At least that's how long I leave it, but I don't, that's what we do. And then I'll just keep going with this piece until I've got as much of it together as I can. And
awesome.
Eventually it'll be, the hope is eventually it will be a complete vessel that we can then put on display in the museum or show off at events and so forth and so on, which is what I hope to do.
And I believe next week, when we open back up, you can see one of Susan's mended bottles in our exhibit. Just so you know, in case you didn't, the Visitor Center opens back up here at Gunston Hall on Monday morning at 9:30, and we will be doing special outdoor tours of the grounds and self-guided experiences in the Visitor Center for all of August. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions for Susan? We've got a question from Cheryl, Susan, about telling us more about the person you mentioned the older bottles belong to. So the bottles that predated the house, did they belong to the Masons possibly, or somebody else?
We think they belong to Anne Eilbach, who was George Mason's first wife. We think they belong to her father. Sometimes we get really, really lucky and we find wine bottle seals. And these were used to identify who that particular bottle belonged to. So we have quite a few seals that have G and A Mason, or G, it says G and A M, meaning George and Ann Mason. The Eilbach seals will have a W-E on them. I can't remember what his middle name was. So,
William.
William, okay, so they'll have a W-E on them, or however, whatever his symbol was, that's what'll be on there. So we do know that the onion bottles, well, we do know, we suspect they're from him, we're pretty sure, and we do know they predate the house because during the time they were only produced a certain period of time, and they weren't used later on in the 1700s.
It's also possible that George Mason could have brought them with him from somewhere other.
Could have brought them from somewhere else. They could have been shipped over from England. There could have been there's a lot of scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, onion bottles were only produced for a certain period of time, but it's just like my plastic Tupperware from the 1990s.
Right.
I haven't stopped using it because it still works.
Right.
Pieces that are broken, those are gone.
Right. Right. And during colonial time, they recycled everything. They would have used everything until they literally could not use it anymore. So wine bottles would have been used over and over again until they broke.
Yep, absolutely. Anybody have any other thoughts or questions for Susan? Our pleasure, Cheryl.
Could I break in here?
Of course, Dave.
Please.
I'd like to show you one of the bottles
Nice.
that Susan was working on the last time she was here. And this is one of the onion bottles you were talking about. It doesn't have the stem on it yet, but this is the kind of base it had on. And these are pretty old. I think they stopped making. I think they stopped making them sometime in the 1740s. But as you say, they were used over and over again, so we're still finding them on the site here. Okay.
Can you show us the bottom of the bottle, Dave?
Okay.
These are really cool. I love looking at the bottoms of these bottles because they're blown by hand, and that lighter spot we can see in the middle of the bottom, that's where they broke the glass off when they were done making it.
Right, it's a push-up, and that's the pontal scar is what happens when they broke the bloat tube off. And I usually, when the artifact, all of the bottles that I've put together, that's usually one of my first pieces I'm able to put together, because one, they're really big and they're very distinctive. And something I started doing before the pandemic kind of shut us down for a little bit was I was starting to take measurements of the different bottles and the pontals, the push-ups, because there's different heights, there's different widths, there's different styles to them. So I was starting to take some measurements to see what we had, and for some of the bottles, if they've got a particular push-up, they're all almost exact in their measurements as to how wide and how big, how tall that push-up is. So those indicate to me that the person who blew those bottles was extremely skilled at what he did. He knew what he was doing. He knew how to get it exactly the same height, the same width, everything. So that gives us a little bit more information, not necessarily about Mason, but definitely about the craftsman of that time.
Absolutely. Well, if anybody has any other thoughts or questions for Susan, feel free to type them in the chat. We're going to move on to one more question. We'll take that one right now. Where might that bottle have been made?
Oh, that's a really good question, and honestly, we have no idea. Possibly England.
Were they making a lot of bottles in Virginia or in the other colonies in the 18th century?
They were, but it was not a huge industry that I know of. If any of you have been down to Jamestown in Virginia, they have the glass blower down there who is fantastic and does incredible work. But I don't know of any particular size industry of bottle making or glass blowing at all in Virginia that I know of. Dave, you might know a little bit more about this.
Yeah, that's correct. The nearest place that they were actually making bottles at the time Mason was living here was in Philadelphia. So we assume that most of the bottles, if not all the bottles we find on the site, have come from England, and they probably had some liquid in them at the time, wine, brandy, whatever.
We're not getting empty bottles shipped over from England.
Right.
Well, excellent question. Thank you, Emily. All right, so we've got one last activity that we're doing today. We're going to take a look at the burial ground, and then we'll open the floor back up for questions in just a couple of moments.
Right now we're at the Mason family burying ground. And this place was called a burying ground, not a cemetery. At George Mason's time, a cemetery was a place like you see in cities and towns. It's sort of like a park, like Arlington Cemetery with mowed grass and trees and flowers and stuff. Family burying grounds were very common on farms in this area. In George Mason's time, people thought that if they owned a piece of land, that piece of land would go down through their family for generations and generations. It would always be in the family. So they had no problem at all about burying their family members on their own land. And that's exactly what George Mason did. Now, I'm an archaeologist, but I don't plan to do any digging here, and I've never done any digging here, with a shovel anyway. But we've done some sort of what you might call virtual digging. using radar. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. Let's go down and see where some of the burials are. Okay, now, as an archaeologist, I got interested in this burying ground when I read an old letter in our library from a woman who visited here during the beginning of the 20th century. And she said the family burying ground had many unmarked mounds, but all of the tombstones were in one corner of the cemetery. And that didn't sort of correspond to what we have here right now. So I got to wondering, where are all of these unmarked burials? What happened is that I was able to get somebody that had a ground penetrating radar set. Now, ground penetrating radar is the kind of technology you can use to sort of look underground. When we look underground in a burying ground like this, we don't see dead bodies, we don't see coffins. What we see is the hole that was dug when people were buried. And we can see that with radar is because the soil that's thrown back into the hole is never as tightly packed as the soil around it. And the radar can pick this up. So what we see when we use radar out here is a bunch of rectangles the size of where you would need to put a casket into. And we can see how big they are and what direction they're oriented in. Okay, let me tell you a little about this burying ground. These two structures behind me, these two big things behind me, are called box tombs, and they are placed near the graves of George Mason and his wife Anne. Okay. This wall that you see here was put up by the last private owner of Gunston Hall, and he put this up in the 1920s. And all he could see out here were these grave markers. And at that time, they were laying on the ground. So he put them upright. He didn't know where the actual people were buried, but he saw the grave markers and he stood them up where they should be. And he built a wall around them. Little knowing that there were burials all over the place that he couldn't see. We had some radar out here in about the year 2002, something like that. Then a few years ago, we had it done again with some more advanced equipment because a lot of the things the 2002 survey picked up were questionable. So we wanted to resolve those questions with more modern equipment. And as I think I mentioned, we've actually found 83 burials out here. We don't know who most of those people are. Some of them are people who are represented by these gravestones out here because the gravestones got moved and their burial was somewhere else in the ground. But some of the other people, we just can't imagine that Mason had 83 people in his family or related to his family that were buried here. And what we're kind of thinking is that eventually some of the slaves were buried out here, and some of these burials were slaves that lived here, especially after George Mason died. In George Mason's time, the slave cemetery was not put next to the family cemetery. It was nearby, but it was almost never put next to the family cemetery. So we think that after Mason died, other people started coming in between that time and the period of the Civil War when the slaves were freed. The slaves started burying themselves out here.
And we know that at other sites, say Monticello, Mount Vernon, we have evidence because the burial sites are still very distinct.
Yes.
That they're separated.
That's correct. Mm-hmm. That is correct. But we don't know that for sure. Even though we don't know who the people are that are buried here, we know where they are buried. So I thought it would be a good idea that we could put markers over the places where these people are buried. Even though we don't know who we are, who they are, we can show that somebody is buried here. So fortunately, we got a young man out here last summer who was going for his Eagle Scout. He got together some of his friends, and we marked out in the grounds here where the burials were, and they put down these square markers over the burials. So now we have 83 of these markers showing where the people are buried in this burying ground.
So we've had a chance to take a look at that awesome little moment in the burying ground. Does anyone have any thoughts or questions about the burying ground? We've got Dave here still who is able to answer them for you. I love those box tombs. Ah, Dave, how many unmarked graves are there?
We have counted 83. Now there may be more that were disrupted by tree roots and disrupted when they built that wall out there that the radar didn't pick up, but we know of at least 83 burials out there.
That's 83. So you were standing in front of the box tombs for George and Ann Mason. What do we know what those are made out of?
Those are made of marble. Very often, in the case of box tombs, the burial was made right in the tomb itself, but that is not the case here. In fact, those tombs were, well, the tomb for Ann Mason was put up after she died. And at that time, George Mason had brought two tombs, one for himself when he died and one for Ann. And the tomb for George Mason's burial could not be found after he died. So there was a long time there where there was nothing marking George Mason's burial place. And the tomb we see out there now was made in, or put up there in about 1960. But we think the actual burials are behind those tombs. They're not in the tombs or below the tombs.
And that box tomb that we put out there for George Mason, that is based on documentary evidence indicating that he was supposed to have one of those. Am I remembering that correctly?
That's correct. That's correct.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We have another question in the chat. Are all of the unmarked burials near the family burying ground or in other places? I'm assuming other places on the property.
Yes. Well, some of them are within that wall we were standing in that video, and some are immediately outside the wall. They cover quite a large area outside the wall, but they're all right clustered together there.
I think the farthest one that we located and marked, it's something like 30 or 40 feet away from the wall, if I recall correctly.
That's about right, yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, any other thoughts or questions from anyone today? Do feel free to shout them out or continue to type them in the chat, whatever makes you feel comfortable. All right. Dave and I and Susan will hang out for a few more minutes, but I know we are beyond our scheduled time today. So I do want to say thank you very much to everyone for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed it, learned something new, and had some fun with us. We are returning next week for our next August Summer Saturday. It is games themed. We'll be doing a couple more games themed Summer Saturdays in the rest of August, one more food themed Summer Saturday, and one more garden themed Summer Saturday. Registration for all of those is on our website. This recording will be on our website probably by middle of next week, and you can catch any of the other recordings of our Summer Saturdays from the beginning of June through last weekend on the website. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. We hope you have a great rest of your Saturday and come back and join us again. Thank you so much.